Good afternoon, everyone. We'll get started in just a minute. We're still letting people in from the waiting room. Thanks for your patience. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. We're so glad you're here. My name is Allison Goebel, and I am the Executive Director of the Greater Ohio Policy Center. And we are thrilled to have you all joining us today for our webinar, New Solutions for Workforce Housing. I will be serving as today's moderator. And before we get started, I want to first acknowledge JP Morgan Chase's generous support of GOPC, which is enabling us to organize this excellent learning opportunity today. Our vision at the Greater Ohio Policy Center is a revitalized Ohio. And a key component of a revitalized Ohio is that every Ohioan has a quality home that they can comfortably afford. We know that housing costs have dramatically escalated in recent years, and that communities across the Ohio and beyond are struggling to build modestly priced, quality housing products. We are thrilled to showcase two different solutions that are seeing promise for workforce or entry-level housing. We had originally planned to bring you three different models today that are producing housing for families earning 80% to 120% of the area median income. But unfortunately, one of our invited panelists had an unexpected medical situation pop up. We at GOPC say health first, and so Dawn Fitzcharles with the William County's Port Authority will not be on today's webinar in order to concentrate on her health. As a very poor substitute for the excellent presentation that Dawn was going to provide, we at GOPC have published on our blog a short case study of the Williams County model, and I will provide a link to that case study in the chat later today. I'm excited to have Annette Reschke with JP Morgan Chase, Stephen Davis with Pantheon, and Veronica Cardello with the Ohio Realtors today, who will share with us promising models for producing housing that does not require ongoing subsidy, but keeps homes and home ownership reachable for moderate income families. Before we jump in, let me start with some housekeeping. So we ask you all to please keep yourselves on mute just so that we can avoid distractions. This webinar is being recorded, and yes, we will post it to our website once we are done later this week. We will also make the slides available for sharing after the presentation, so don't worry, you can also access that. We are going to leave time for lots of questions and discussion among our panelists. If you have a question, please submit it in the chat. We'll start taking questions about 140, 145, and hope that we can get to everything. And with that, I'm going to invite Annette Reschke, the executive director or an executive director in community banking with JP Morgan Chase, to provide some remarks. Annette?
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to this. I am based in Chicago and cover the Midwest clients. I'm happy to be here to support Chase in this community for Ohio. I've been with the bank for about 20 years here, and it's been astounding to see how we've sort of grown and pivoted and trying to increase our support for this workforce housing solutions and affordability. Along with at Chase, we do construction loans and permanent loans is my specialty in my group. And then, sorry, just making sure it's still here.
Okay, that was me.
Sorry.
Sorry about spotlighting. That. Nope, that was me.
Okay, that's okay. I try to undo it. That's okay. So we do like construction loans and permanent loans is where I kind of specialize in. And then I have different teams that I work with in regards to doing our equity investments for multifamily projects with our agency group. And then we have our permanent solutions. We are a Fannie affordable executed lender. We have new market tax credits that we support, institutional lending. And then what we kind of want to drive here and talk about a little bit more later on too is the workforce housing. As it's been said, there's a pressing need for affordable housing. We're trying to find additional solutions and expand our business and try to find opportunities. And so we're trying to transform people's lives and the places they work and trying to partner with those that are locally in Ohio, Midwest, and the national footprint as well. I'd like to say locally here in Ohio, in April of this year, we had a $10 million commitment to the Affordable Housing Trust for Columbus and Franklin County. So that kind of sits home for many of the folks that reside in Ohio. And that capital gives Affordable Housing Trust an opportunity to do statewide funding and deploy capital across other resources. So it lets our money be a subsidy to other funds that sort of help address those needs. And then in regards to the workforce housing, we started that team in 2021, and that is where there doesn't need to be a LIHTC component to the community and to the project. And so we've been closing the deals in 2023 and have an active pipeline at this point. But those would be projects that have the AMIs that would allow at least a 15% discount to market. And so we still want to see some discount to market for those affordabilities, but happy to continue to support and help fill that housing gap as best we can. So I want to turn it over to the group here. I have a few slides at the end. Or a slide at the end we can go over, and happy to answer questions throughout. But want to give the time to kind of walk through, and some slides look like they're going to be presenting overall with Stephen and Veronica. So thank you so much.
Annette, wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, I'm going to ask Stephen to kick us off. I know that, Stephen, you have some data slides, and then you're also going to talk about the new product that you have. So let me get up the slide deck that you need. Sorry, you all making you seasick. Is it visible on your end?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Stephen, please take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stephen Davis. I'm the Chief Development Officer for Pantheon Innovative Builders. Our focus is affordable housing development, along with 3D construction printing and workforce education development and curriculum. So we bit off a few different apples there, but our main thought was to take my experience as an affordable housing developer with CMHA and a private developer, along with my partners, just knowledge on curriculum and technology, and sort of merge that together to address and attack the sort of housing demand and really crisis that we're looking at, not only in the state of Ohio, but across the country. And I want to just start this by just talking about some things that I think we all are familiar with as it relates to some of the drivers for the housing demand. But I just think it's always important to reiterate those things so that we know kind of why we're doing this, right? So some of those drivers start with population growth in the state, at least for us here in Ohio. We're seeing people moving and migrating towards some of our urban centers here locally in the state. And we're seeing our numbers grow, and we're also seeing that we have an older population here. So there's also an increased demand for senior housing that needs to be affordable. And all of this puts additional pressure on that workforce demographic, right? That's between the low income, but that's also maybe your suburban designer homes are sort of out of reach for them financially. And so you've got that sort of missing middle demand that needs something that is maybe not necessarily going to be your Section 8 or your LIHTC projects, but something that is not going to be a $500,000 home with an HOA. Income disparities are a huge driver that are hurting us because what's happening is that you've got people that are paying too much for their particular housing situation, too much out of their income, whether it's over that 30% threshold of their income is going to housing. And we even have a large section of people that are paying up to 50% of their income that is going into housing. And then we've got large numbers of people that have lower incomes that can't afford much. And so what that does is that puts the pressure on the lower end from the housing standpoint And if we can't help the people at the bottom, it just continues to create pressure all the way up the pipeline, and it continues to drive housing costs up. The more people that you have that have a need, the higher the prices go because of the demand that the landlords can charge or even the home sellers can charge. And then it continues just to push people out. So in order to curb that, you have to increase your supply. But increasing the supply, as we know, takes time. And it just seems though, as we talk about these solutions and we continue to talk about this issue, the time doesn't stop, right? So we have to come up with ways to start to implement some of these policies, practices, product types sooner than later if we really want to start to have the impact that we need. And we can go to the next slide. Right. So looking at the demographic data, right? Our Black homeownership rate in the state of Ohio, about 30%, 36% of Black households own their own home, compared to 66% of white households, which means that you've got a large percentage of Black residents in the state that are renting as opposed to home ownership. And then that's also going to impact your overall generational wealth and people's ability to to mobilize upward. And these are things that people don't necessarily think about when you're thinking about housing, but when you own a home, it grants you so many different opportunities, whether it's the equity that you have in the home, the ability to generate income from that home. And the more people that are sort of left out of that, they're forced to pay rent to someone else, and that's money that they can't really do anything with. And these are sort of things that it creates a larger, broader societal impact that can hurt people, and we've seen it. And so these are again reasons, sort of the socioeconomic reasons that we want to address this, aside from just the hey, people need housing. We can go to the next slide. And then this is just going back to the cost burden and how it impacts people. If you're paying more than 30% or you're paying 50% of your income towards rent, that's going to hurt your ability to pay for and purchase other things, whether it's a car repair or whether it's education or training or just even basic needs and basic necessities, or just other things that people want, and that's other money that could be going back into the economy in different ways. And if it's all going towards rent, then again, that does not help the renter, but it's not great for the economy. So we have to find ways to help to reduce that cost burden on people, so that people, one, can save money, but also circulate that money through the economy in other ways. And next slide. And then this just talks about the age, the growth in population and the growth in our senior population. And I don't want to belabor that point too much, but again, if you've got more people and you already have a housing demand, that's going to create issues that we're seeing. In the state of Ohio, we have roughly 500,000 extremely low income renters. And we have about 180,000 affordable available rental units. So that's about a 275,000 number rental unit gap that we're missing, and that's just sort of in real time right now, and that's just in that one demographic of extremely low income renters. That doesn't take us into this middle workforce demographic that we're talking about, and everyone else. And so if you look at how many units do we actually need in the state of Ohio, that number could be anywhere up to 500,000 to 1 million units, and we don't have it, and we're not anywhere close to really meeting that demand as it stands right now. And so next slide. And so that's where innovative solutions comes into the mix, right? When we're trying to figure out ways how we can meet this demand to help solve this crisis that we have to start to look at other things besides just your regular brick and mortar, stick built housing, because again, that takes time. We have a labor shortage. And those materials we're seeing them sort of steadily rise in terms of price and cost. Now, some of our construction pricing has come down a little bit. There was a huge spike during COVID. The cost of wood went insanely high, but that number has kind of come back down to earth, but it still hasn't gone down to sort of pre-COVID numbers. And because of cost and time, that's why we started to look at 3D construction printing, because we thought if we could use a robot to help reduce the amount of labor that you need, and this robot can be more precise, it can use less waste, and it can save us on time, that can help speed up the process of sort of closing the gap on the need. The issue is that because it's new, because the technology is new, because the processes are new, no one really knows how those things all come together and how they will overall impact what it is that we're trying to do. Again, the goal is to, because we would use less labor, it would be more time efficient, there would be less waste, and it would lower costs, that would help us close that gap faster. But we need to sort of prove all those things out, right? Because everyone asks us, well, what's the cost and what's the time? And it's hard to convince people that this is something that, like, everyone thinks that it sounds good in theory, but then to actually commit to doing it is a whole different sort of idea for people to wrap their heads around. And so what really needs to happen is we need our municipalities and our counties and our state to be open to these ideas and concepts, and to have public and private partnerships to allow for pilot projects, especially when it comes to urban infill, to see not only if it works, but exactly how it works. So we can figure out and design a process around 3D construction printing. Modular construction has already been accepted. So we would want to go a similar route with the technology that we're using here. And for us, what we've done is we partnered with Lutheran Ministries in Cleveland locally to do that exact thing. And we were able to receive a grant from the city of Cleveland to do a pilot project for urban infill. So we're going to 3D print 2 houses, one up front and then one a year later. And that time in between, we're going to look at the data from 3D printing the first house and look at ways that we can improve that process to when we 3D print the second house, and see if we can make it happen faster and see if we could make it more cost efficient. And by taking that methodology, then, because it's us, a nonprofit in the city of Cleveland, all sort of working together, we can all sort of work as a team to not only continue to sort of repeat the process, but it serves as a model that other communities can use to help sort of with this housing crisis, because no one solution is going to solve this problem. We need multiple solutions. And so for us, the way we look at it is that we're not going to take over the housing market and have the biggest piece of the pie. But if we're an option for different communities where it makes sense, then we want to make sure that we can not only provide the service, but we can provide the information and the data from a trusted source that's transparent and true to the various communities where these services and where this product actually fits.
Stephen, wonderful. Thank you so much. I am going to try to get Veronica spotlighted. Stephen, thank you. And I looked like there was a question that came in. We will get to that here in just a few minutes, but we're going to run through all the presentations and then reserve just a general question and answer period. So I'm happy to introduce Veronica Cardello with the Ohio Realtors, who is going to talk about a different model that is under development. Veronica.
Thanks, Allison. I really appreciate being here with you all today. I think that this is going to be very innovative and very unique to everyone because it can serve a myriad of purposes here. So infill housing pre-approved building designs was a venture that we started probably about a few years ago. So next slide, please. We actually at Ohio Realtors contracted with the Greater Ohio Policy Center to conduct a nationwide scan of what pre-approved infill housing design programs look like. And originally, it didn't start like that. Originally, we were talking to GOPC about what policies were really impeding building, like what were the policies that were currently in process or in place? Were they being developed? How long was the adoption process taking? We were looking at other barriers that local governments had experienced, such as weak markets, legacy economies, and older housing stock. So when we did this deep dive, we were really curious to find the nuts and bolts as to what was really causing all of the different problems that we were experiencing with housing. So luckily, when we contracted with them, we found a solution that actually hit a bunch of different areas of housing all at once, and that was pre-approved housing. Next slide, please. So what are pre-approved housing infill designs? Pre-approved infill building plans are a way to grant expedited permitting to a set of pre-designed plans that are architecturally appropriate for a specific community. These plans are designed to promote new construction by eliminating the time and expense associated with the city's plan review process, and also to help streamline the regulatory processes, promote new housing development in existing neighborhoods, offer more choice in housing types, and reduce some of the development costs. So once we did this whole nationwide scan and we really had an idea as to what pre-approved infill housing looked like, we were seeing in most communities that it really depended on the community, but some communities were saving costs on building. Some communities were actually saving costs on the streamlining the process for permitting. It was really a gambit of all the different issues that we had been experiencing when we were talking about doing this deep dive. Next slide, please. So in our pre-approved process, we decided we were going to focus on exactly what Stephen was talking about, and that was the missing middle. So the missing middle refers to a range of housing types comparable to single-family homes, but they contain multiple units. In some cases, they are duplexes, fourplexes, townhomes, live workspaces, accessory dwelling units, you name it. We focused on missing middle. Next slide, please. So once we developed our pre-approved process and we realized what the problem was and where we were going, we are currently now in phase 2. Like I said, this has been a multi-year phase project. So we are in phase 2, and that means we are designing and implementing a pattern book of housing for the state of Ohio. We are complementing it with a zoning toolkit for municipalities to help make development more easily accessible in their community by adopting not only the pattern book, but also some specific zoning reform recommendations. Now, with those zoning reform recommendations, it's really a gambit of those different issues. We're talking about minimum lot width areas, front and rear setback lines, density and dwelling size, permitting as to what types of homes you're allowed to have, especially when it comes to like accessory dwelling units and whatnot. So we're really focused on a whole myriad of different issues that as it pertains to housing. So right now we're currently almost done with our pattern book. I'm super excited about it. Our committee has about 2, maybe 3 more meetings left this year. And once we are done with this book, we plan on doing a release to the public in January. Once the release is happening, we look forward to the communities for communities to adopt it. So I will say that since we've started this venture and we've talked about it and talked about it and talked about it, we've gained so much interest from not only interest from within Ohio, but also outside of Ohio. There's a lot of folks that have been reaching out to us to see how our pattern book and our zoning recommendations are going to shake out. So I'm super excited to say that we have over 40 communities right now that are willing to adopt not only our pattern book, but also willing to adopt some of the zoning recommendations, and that's just in the state of Ohio. We have a lot of high-level interest among our state legislature and our administrative offices in the fact that they're supporting us with this effort. So it has been a wonderful, wonderful journey. We have had bumps and bruises along the way, but it has taken a whole village, quite honestly, to get us to where we are today. Next slide, please. So some other housing types that are on the horizon that we've been talking about has been modular. Modular has taken over our industry a little bit because a lot of folks are interested in different housing types, not just single family dwellings and not just duplexes. But when we're talking about modular, it's really something that's unique and it's customizable. It's assembled on a permanent foundation, but the panels themselves are manufactured in a controlled setting. So that's something that we've been working on, and maybe that's a part 2 or part 3 to this project. Who knows? But with here at Ohio Realtors, we're really excited about our pattern book. We are focused really specifically on single family housing and duplexes. We plan on having 3 sets of patterns per design. So that's really going to give us 6 different designs total that we're looking at. And like I said, we're almost to the finish line with our pattern book. So really excited to be here and really excited to share this news with everyone.
Veronica, that's wonderful. Thank you. Let me see if I can add myself and our other speakers. So we have, I think, some questions maybe in the chat, maybe not. But I'm going to go ahead and add everyone else into the, oops, maybe not. Okay. Well, let's start with some questions. Veronica, I have you right here. I'll switch over to Stephen, but I have you right here already highlighted, and it looks like Aaron's helping me out. Thanks, Aaron. So Veronica, can you talk a little bit about just why the Ohio Realtors Association is interested in housing? I mean, it seems obvious, but also maybe not. So can you talk about particularly your interest in increasing a mix of housing and density?
Yes, absolutely. So we at Ohio Realtors, we're definitely interested in housing, as you can tell by Realtor in our name. But we're really more focused on how we can make a difference and make a big impact in local communities. And so when we ventured down this path on pre-approved pattern book designs, if you will, infill designs, it was something that we wanted to make sure that we were able to cross a wide variety of housing of the housing spectrum. So I'm super excited because infill is very important to our realtor members because who likes to see a vacant lot coming down the center of the main street, if you will, and that's really what infill design is designed to do, ironically. So this really focuses our efforts on making sure that we not only are including missing middle, but we're also addressing what we have in our local communities. And that's kind of like the missing teeth of each communities with vacant properties or abandoned properties. That's really what infill housing is designed to do.
Veronica, thank you so much. I had a question submitted to me directly, and I'll copy it into the primary chat here in a minute. But Stephen, it's a question for you, which is, well, actually, I think for both, but let's start with you, Stephen. For 3D printing and modular designs, do you receive pushback from building officials? And how do you address their concerns, doubts, and questions?
Yeah, so I'll jump into that. Yes, we do receive pushback from building officials, mostly because it's a new process. But for us, what it came down to is I didn't realize that I was giving them the answer that they were kind of looking for. But essentially, with 3D printing, we use concrete, and so my thought process was we've used concrete to build literally forever as humans, right? Going back to Rome and everything else. And this is just a new way to basically use concrete in our structures. But from a permitting standpoint and from building officials, it really comes down to, structural safety. And when you go through the design process of 3D printing a building, it's not just me who is an attorney by trade, just drawing shapes and saying, we're going to 3D print this, right? We still use an architect, we still use an engineer of record. And every safety precaution, every standard building, like all the various building codes, we're still using those and applying them to our 3D printed structures. And that's really how we've addressed that to this point. There are some certain aspects of this. So right now, when we're looking at building designs, we are using structural steel as the main support. And our goal is to transition away from that over time so that the actual 3D printed structure is supported through its design using the concrete in and of itself. But with anything, like there's got to be a transition process. So essentially, we're going to give building departments and permitting officials what they want by using that standard structural steel sort of support, but eventually transitioning out of that over time, and just working with them on how to do that.
Stephen, that's helpful. I appreciate your ability to kind of see the phases and sort of bringing folks along to maintain their comfort level. I had a question for you, actually, Stephen, since we have you on the mic. So Pantheon's actually a for-profit company, right? And
Yes.
yes, but I would very much call you very much like a social enterprise type of company, right? With a focus on people, planet, and
Yeah.
profits. So I didn't want
Yes.
to know if you wanted to talk a little bit about that, but then also just more broadly talk about the challenges and opportunities you're seeing as a for-profit company trying to work in a space which is typically occupied by nonprofits.
Yeah. So for all intents and purposes, we probably should be a nonprofit. Um, I'm very passionate about housing. I grew up in Youngstown, Ohio. We were a poor family. We moved around a lot and we lived in a lot of sketchy apartments. And what really drove me into housing from a legal career standpoint was going back to Youngstown in my college years and when I was going through law school and seeing some of those same apartments still standing that I grew up in. And like they should have been probably demolished then. But not only were they still standing, there were families with kids coming out of them. And I'm just like, I'm for sure I ate lead paint chips in that house. So, it probably still should not be there. But my whole thing was that housing is so critical to outcomes, not just career outcomes, but also health outcomes. And I think it's important that that we have people that are addressing this affordable housing need and not just the person and the companies that are going out and building the nice Ryan homes out in the suburbs, with gated communities and HOAs. The urban infill is critical. You go to some of these different communities throughout Ohio, and whether it's Columbus or Youngstown or Cleveland or wherever you go, they've done a good job, Ohio Department of Development, of providing money to help demolish a lot of these old houses, but we have these gaps in our neighborhood. And it's just an overall poor use of land. And so we wanted to target how we could help directly impact that because we know that if we can impact housing, that we can impact lives on multiple levels. And if we can create communities around it, we can stabilize and anchor communities. We can provide workforce education and training that will allow people to kind of expand their career opportunities, then that's sort of the impact that we want to have. But we were so excited to do it that we just said we'll just be a LLC instead of going through the nonprofit process. So now we're here.
I love it. I love it. Well, that's great. Um, Veronica, there's a question for you, and then at least another question for Stephen, and maybe another one in the wing. So, Veronica, the question is: you said that there will be 3 patterns for single-family houses. What will be the range size? Will everything be single story? And what will be the other essential elements?
Fair question. Totally fair question. So right now we're not finalized in what we've decided in terms of what we're looking at. So we're going to have a wide variety when it comes to the a single family house. So it's not going to be. I wouldn't necessarily put it over 1,500 square feet. So when it comes to essential elements, we're looking right now to kind of do a front back kind of development, if that makes sense. So where the front of the home is the main dwelling unit, the back of the home can be either an accessory dwelling unit or it could be it could be part of the main home. So it could be very versatile in that regard. So we haven't finalized anything yet. So I'm super, but we will, like I said, 2-3 more meetings and we'll be good to go.
Thank you, Veronica. Stephen, I'm gonna bat the ball back over to you. So the question that was sent to me, which I've reposted so everyone can see, how does material costs and availability for 3D printed homes compare to traditional construction? Is there a significant cost savings there, or is it primarily the cost savings through labor?
Okay, make sure I wasn't on mute. So that's a it depends question. If you're the smaller the structure, the more the cost savings. If we're doing an 800 square foot house, then and it's just a relatively simple geometry, just like a regular square or a rectangle. Your cost for concrete on that is relatively low, and it does save you costs because there's just less components that go into it. And that's just from our experience. As you go bigger, those costs do increase. And it's mostly because you're adding additional structural steel and various components like that that are going to drive your costs up. Um, right now, labor and sort of time efficiency are your big drivers for costs. And also there's a hidden cost in less waste. Because because we're doing this through computer design, and then you've got a robot that's actually doing a majority of the work, there is just less waste overall. And that waste is sort of a hidden cost that's hard to account for when you're in construction. But you're still essentially using less material, and that's where we're seeing cost savings early on, and we anticipate that those savings will grow. Right now, it's about a 10% savings for us. Some of the larger 3D printing companies like Icon are talking numbers like close to like 30 and 50%, but Icon's a little bit different animal than we are because they build their own 3D printers. And we don't like to jump into, there's a lot of numbers that get thrown out there, but those aren't our numbers and we can't necessarily support them. For us, that cost savings right now is about 10 to 15%. And that's generally on smaller 800 to 1,000 square foot structures.
Thank you, Stephen. Well, I know everyone's looking to save costs, so 10 or 15 is nothing to sneeze at, 10 or 15%.
Sure.
A question I think that everyone might want to weigh in on or provide some insights. And the question was directed to me personally, and I've reposted here. So how do you address infill housing in communities where the average housing value is still out, the average housing value is still sort of falls short of the cost of construction. So if you're working in a neighborhood where housing values are $40,000 to $60,000, how do you do infill? I think that's where the question is heading. So I don't know, Veronica, you want to start, and then Stephen, and then Annette, if you have any thoughts. Go ahead, Veronica.
Absolutely. So right now, what we're trying to do is we're trying to take advantage of as many state programs that there are. So we have been looking at kind of coupling all of the different programs that was just released out in, I want to say January of this year, maybe February at the least. But we've been working with our team really to develop a comprehensive strategy for developers to use. So in the greater scheme of things, if I'm a municipality, what I will be able to do is once I adopt the pattern book that we are recommending, and then I adopt the zoning reform changes, it will be easier for us to do development and attract developers when we couple that with the financing tools that the state has offered. So we're talking about, oh my gosh, I'm drawing a quick blank.
Like the single family tax credit and Welcome Home Ohio?
Tax credit, Welcome Home Ohio. There's been so many, so I do apologize. But we are working with our team to couple those to address the affordability of these homes.
So for me, working in development, I think it's critical that we work with the municipalities and that we work with the state. So kind of piggybacking off of what Veronica said, when I go in and I talk to a different community about development, because we also build conventional housing as well. It's not just 3D printing. But essentially the conversation is like, look, if we want to develop affordable housing and we want to build it, the only way to do it is to find a way to offset that cost. right? And so in order to offset the cost so that we can offer the home at a lower sale price, or you could rent it at a lower amount, we have to find ways for it to cost less to build. And so that requires a commitment from the municipality or the state to help with that. But it's not always in the form of a check, right? Like, so if I go into an area and per the question, the cost of the value of the home is lower than what the cost is, then we'd have to start offsetting that by looking at things like tax abatements, um, fee waivers, even the land in some instances, right? Because these are all things that drive the cost up, right? My tap fees to connect it to the city water, the taxes that I pay, the real estate taxes if it's a rental property that I have to pay. And I'm not saying that we necessarily do a full tax abatement. I'm a big fan of pilot agreements, payment in lieu of taxes, right? So we get a certain amount, we do a calculation and we say, okay, we're going to pay this cost up front instead of paying a tax bill every year, right? Like there's different mechanisms out there that you can use where you're not going to a city and say, hey, can you hand me a check for $500,000 or what have you. Now, if the city has money, like we, saw this big push of money after COVID, then yes, absolutely go after it. But I think all these other components still need to be a part of it to help bring that cost down as much as possible so that you can, offer the end product at a lower cost.
Stephen, that's helpful. Yeah, Annette, please.
Yeah, on my side, I mean, I think we're still seeing the burden of the construction costs, right? So we had quite a lull, I think about a year and a half ago to a year of deal closings just because, they're not working, they're not panning out. And it's really based on this innovation to design of construction and requirements to design plans. So I know one of the things is even like parking structures and parking. So they're trying to do tax orient development, right? So then they can remove some of the parking structures or requirements. So it could be more of just the sites and the units themselves. On our side, we have kind of like a minimum when we're looking at like units. So we tend to do about 40 units of multifamily as our project sizes. And a lot of that's that initial economies of scale of just getting more units. And so there are some one-offs and we might go a little bit smaller, but that's where we start to see where the deals can work on a pro forma basis for our units and flip. I just looked at a couple of projects outside of Ohio that were disclosed recently, but again, like 200 to 270,000 a unit just in the construction costs, right? Forget about like the soft costs and the other things and the interest carry. So how do you get those to work, right? And so we're working with developers. We look at, other sources are out there. If there's TIF funding, I have a couple that have like ARPA funds that are still out there. So they need to close by the end of the year, county funds, home funds. So we try to, whatever state we're in, wherever they're at. So I work with Midwest developers, but the projects are all over, right? They're nationwide. So we try to kind of piggyback on what we're seeing, what they're hearing, and the developers that we work with, they really have close ties to the communities in the city and they get that concept broken in a year or two before it even comes to design, right? So they had so many more designs a couple of years ago until this 30% increase minimum of construction costs happened. And so pilots definitely, right, trying to get some even like subsidies for if there's supportive services or someone is giving that externally as opposed to the project funding for it. So we're seeing different ways of kind of finding that in there. Rates were not helpful over the last couple of years, right? Whereas a small dip, which is helpful, but that dip is still at a higher point than it was years ago, right? So like we do appreciate that it's coming down, but it does cost more to get these deals done. And so we try to really find ways to structure those subsidies in there. And not that it's like a half contract, but like actually just getting community dollars in there and trying to show the why this is going to work for the community and what it could bring as a benefit and trying to find those dollars that are soft sources that don't have repayments. So I think it's hard, right? And that's where we're trying to come in and find other creative solutions to do things. And even, when we do some different grants or different things that actually help, they might do like services for those communities or ways to find, other opportunities. And so I think that's going to be a continued challenge, but I do see that we're not continuing to see that increase over increase, that it's sort of stabilized and even some things have come down a little bit, but it's still at elevated levels.
Annette, that's extremely helpful to hear sort of that the national view that you have and what you're seeing. And it's a little comforting, I guess, in Ohio to know that everyone's facing these challenges. Right? I mean, nobody should be, but in any case, like we're all struggling. So that's a really helpful perspective. Thank you. There was a question in the chat, which is, I think, kind of a continuation of the conversation we just had. And the question is, I'm interested in what strategies are available to communities hoping to develop smaller incremental workforce housing developments. And those developments that may not be competitive for a 9% LIHTC and need additional resources beyond the 4% LIHTC to close the financing gap. As you all know, Dawn Fitzcharles with the Williams County Port Authority was unable to join us today due to a medical situation. You'll see in her blog, but I'll just weigh in, sort of piggybacking on the last conversation and a little bit on this question. So, in a nutshell, Dawn could provide many more details, but in a nutshell, the Williams County Port Authority achieve some cost savings in the single family homes that they're building several ways. So they get land free through the land bank. They are building on slabs, right? So they're avoiding the cost of the basement. The Port Authority is completely run by the volunteer board, but that volunteer board has very strategic appointments with a lawyer, a real estate agent, a local government official, and someone else who, again, is an accountant who's bringing the specialized sort of expertise that you need for real estate. They also, because of where Williams County is, they're in a logistics heavy and manufacturing heavy community. And so they have arranged with the Menards distribution center to get supplies at cost, right? And so there's also other factors, but those levers there have helped them keep housing under $200,000 without any subsidy. So go make friends with the logistics distribution centers in your county, I guess. But I wanted to see if anyone else wanted to provide comments to this recent question about incremental workforce housing that is not competitive for the 9% LIHTC, may need more than 4%. And frankly, if there's other solutions or tools out there that may allow some flexibility in terms of income targeting and restrictions on the housing.
A couple of things that we at Pantheon are looking at, and me specifically, you have the Welcome Home Ohio program, which I think isn't perfect by any stretch of the means, but also is a very good tool. And I think that I believe that there are some amendments that are coming that will help that program sort of expand it in terms of buyers that would be eligible for it and kind of changing some of those deed restrictions. But I think even in its current form, I think it's something that needs to be looked at more, both by municipalities, land banks, and also developers. But also you have, things like new market tax credits that you could use, even historic tax credits. I don't love historic tax credits just because once you start getting into old buildings, you run into very new, expensive problems. But if you could find the right type of building that is old but not too old, so you're not, restoring 200-year-old glass and things like that, you can really make historic tax credits work. It is a higher level type of deal development, but I think it's something that has value because again, we're talking about better land use. And so if we've got an old building that hasn't been used or is sort of taking up a lot of space, you could take that building, use historic tax credits, you could stack some of these other programs with it, and be able to get in, because of the size of some of these buildings, you can fit 25, 30 units in them to help address the needs. So I think there's different ways, but really you have to get creative. And as a municipality, you have to be open to different ideas and be willing to support them, not only just with words, but with actions. I think that's the big key.
And I can say we've also had some high success with some of the historic tax credits. So I've seen a few where there's a renovation of a couple schools that we've seen, right? And so those they do have a little bit higher utilities with some of the common spaces. So that's something we kind of have to watch for as well. But we just had one that was it was in Chicago and actually a Gold Coast very market area. So huge discount for market. So rents are kind of driving where we can hit right at the top of those AMIs. but significant amount of historic tax credits were under the deal. So it really just helped that subsidy come in there. And then this was one that was actually in Chicago. And so the city came in, like a lot of, soft money did come into those projects. And so when things happen and come to the table, if there's any additional costs, they tend to want to kind of stay in the project, and they might even re-ump. You know what I mean? Like, I think we've had some increases in interest reserve for some of these construction loans that were closing at a certain time, and we're able to kind of get like a true up or additional funding from some of those initial sources. So it really takes a partnership, honestly. And I say that that's how the deals get done is, you want to know your contractor, right? You want to have a really good relationship with them, because from, ground up or renovation, they're the ones that are going to help get it done, right? And they're the ones that you're going to want to support the whole time. So, and of course, a very trusted lender.
Veronica, any final thoughts before I ask Annette to continue on that theme of a trusted lender? But Veronica, any final comments?
I just appreciate everybody's time today. I know that one thing that I was curious about for both Stephen and Annette, I'm not sure. Have you guys talked about longevity of housing and its sustainability?
Lightning round.
Yeah. So with what we're doing, yes, that's actually a big portion of why we're doing what we're doing. And instead of longevity, we use resiliency. Because again, we're using concrete, and you can look around the world and see concrete structures that have been standing for, not just decades, but even centuries in some cases. And, we're looking and we're seeing what's going on down in Florida and in the Carolinas with these hurricanes coming through. And the testing of the material that we're using for 3D printing, it's a stronger concrete than your standard concrete. Where, just to get a little bit techy on you, like the PSI value for your CMU block, which is the standard sort of concrete block that we use now, that number comes in at 2,000, right? So our concrete, that's 2,000 PSI after 7 days. Ours is coming in at 2,500 after 7 days, and after 28 days, it's coming in at 5,000. So it's stronger, and we feel that over time, that's something that's going to be more resilient in those sort of situations where you're dealing with high winds and water and everything else. So yes, we are thinking about long-term resiliency, but then also the material can be recycled. You can knock the building down, you can take the concrete in it, and you can crush it up, and you could use it again. So there's the sustainability aspect for it. And we're also looking at more sustainable materials where it's not necessarily the material itself, but everything else that goes into making concrete has a very large carbon footprint. So we're looking at using materials to make the same sort of strength concrete, that just the materials themselves have smaller carbon footprint. So those are all things that are sort of in our brain.
Yeah, and I think not on like the actual materials used, but kind of how we're looking at the sustainability of environmental. So either the areas that we're going into, if there's any sort of waterfall, kind of where the drains are and everything at, or where that could be, we're trying to making sure that things are built to last, right? So like at 20, 30 years, there isn't something that creeps into that and that wasn't designed that we can't flip on a vapor barrier up on top, so there's a lot of things that we build to adjust or want to see that in there too, which just helps that sustainability. But environmentally, like I think, Stephen kind of brought up to start with this project, if it's a renovation project, there's a lot of like materials that we want to make sure they're exposed properly, making sure that the workers' life safety. So everything is really on the initial front of all those like initial inspections, plan and cost reviews, physical needs assessments, all of that gets addressed. And then we want to make sure, 50 years down the line, these buildings are there for the refinance for everything that's going through. So I say to us, like I always kind of look at like a 50-year kind of plan that goes out for the buildings, but certain systems are 25 years or wherever they are, but do try to work at looking at that at fronts, right? And even, we have stuff that's in Florida and everything else, right? So that's just a whole nother level of requirements that's above many of what they get done. But yeah, they're built hopefully the last, and they're built higher than they can be. So we'll see what happens. But I do hope that that's a continued trend that keeps happening for these sustainability of projects.
That's a great question to start to wind down the this webinar on. Before we go, I want to give Annette with JP Morgan Chase the final word. Again, as the sponsors of this great learning opportunity, I want to say thank you, and thank you to Veronica with Ohio Realtors and Stephen with Pantheon, and thank you all. But don't go anywhere, because we are going to do kind of a final rundown, and I'll do kind of final housekeeping. But Annette, would you like me to display that slide now?
Yeah, if you want to see the slide, I was just going to do a couple highlights, but I want to kind of start with that. So, this is one of the marketing, sort of external marketings that we can do for our workforce housing solutions. And so on this here, we kind of just talk about on the right-hand side, the investments that Chase does, right? So Chase is large. We try to give back to the communities. We try to show our investments, but we showed that there's been, 20 billion committed to development and preservation, over 125,000 units of affordable housing. Our new market tax credit group, which are other ways to get opportunities and even community sources. We have $2 billion invested in there. Historic tax credits is another booming part of our business. 700 million going in there. 2 billion regarding our community development financial institutions. So just trying to show like the impact of where we try to lend in and lean as a leader. And then just going around like as a takeaway for sort of the workforce housing solutions, like with the deals that don't have 9% or 4% credits, be it either it's too competitive or because there's just not enough subsidy. When we talk about the 4%, how do you get deals that get done the right way? And so part of that is just really looking at the economics to make sure that they sustain the loans that we're looking at. We look to make sure that at least half of the project has a rent restriction. And with that, there's not a cutoff of like an AMI, meaning like it's 30, 50, 60, 70, it could be 120. But the difference is that we want to make sure there's a 15% discount to market. And so we tend to go into markets that are a little bit stronger. We talked about like in Ohio, we can go sort of anywhere there, but there has to still be a disconnect with an AMI restriction to an affordability of market. And so 15% is kind of where we want to see that at, and that could vary. Some of the more populated larger towns will have that discount, kind of naturally. And then we work with some of those suburban areas for that. And then debt coverages for projects, we look at 1-2 coverage, loan to cost and loan to value 65% with based on other equity that comes into these projects. So this is sort of just a highlight of kind of a few things that we look at. We're happy to lean in, even make other contacts if it's not Chase, if there's other opportunities or just sources there. Happy to be a partner, however that could be.
Annette, thank you. Well, as I said before, we will make sure that a recording of this webinar is available on GOPC's website later this week, as will the slides. So that really helpful one-pager from JP Morgan Chase will be available there. Please join me in thanking our panelists one last time for their time and expertise today, and a head nod to Dawn Fitzcharles with the Williams County Port Authority, who was unable to join us today, but is also doing great work. All right, everyone. Thank you so much and have a great afternoon. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.